December 8, 2020, Greenbrier County, West Virginia. Two young boys stepped off the school bus, eager to see their mother. But when Oriana Myers met them at the end of the driveway, something felt off. Across her face, a dark red line stretched from one ear to the other, a mark that neighbors later described as unsettling. One of the boys looked up, his voice trembling. "Mom, what's on your face?" Oriana didn't react. She quietly led the children inside, her gaze fixed ahead, and spoke softly. "It's just a drawing, honey. Let's go inside." Case 1, Oriana Myers, Williamsburg, West Virginia, is a quiet community tucked into the rolling hills of Greenbrier County. For most residents, life here is peaceful. But for 25-year-old Oriana Myers, those same hills became the setting for a deeply tragic event that would shock the state. Investigators later determined that Oriana's actions that December morning were deliberate and planned. Behavior experts reviewing the case described a pattern of intention, symbolic gestures, and calculated behavior that revealed a disturbing psychological state. The red line across her face, for example, was interpreted as a form of psychological separation, a visual signal that she had created a mental boundary between herself and the life she had known. The case also revealed a strong emotional motive. Oriana's husband, Brian Bumgarner, had been away from the home for just over a week following a vehicle accident that required him to stay closer to work. Investigators concluded that Oriana viewed his absence not as practical necessity, but as personal abandonment. In her final messages to him, she expressed anger and resentment rather than remorse, writing, "You'll have nothing to come back to. No one cares. Why should I?" The notes she left behind, sealed in plastic bags and carefully placed, showed forethought and intent. One was labeled, "My Confession." Another, "Will." Experts noted that these messages provided insight into her mindset and the symbolic significance she placed on her actions. Neighbors described a surreal scene on the day of the tragedy. Flames quickly engulfed the home, sending smoke curling into the winter sky. Emergency responders arrived promptly, but authorities later confirmed that Oriana did not attempt to escape or call for assistance. Instead, she remained present, a testament to the calculated nature of her choices. Experts analyzing the case emphasized that this was not a spontaneous event. The sequence of actions, from the marking on her face to the planning evident in her notes, showed a chilling combination of personal grievance, symbolic gestures, and a deliberate attempt to control the narrative of her family's final hours. Behavioral analysts described Oriana's case as an example of how intense emotional distress, combined with feelings of abandonment, can result in catastrophic decisions. While her actions cannot be excused, studying the case provides insight into warning signs that can help communities, neighbors, and authorities into warning signs. The Williamsburg case also highlighted systemic challenges. For instance, there were no prior reports suggesting an imminent risk, illustrating how a household's private dynamics can hide psychological distress until tragedy strikes. Investigators stressed the importance of recognizing subtle cues, like isolation, sudden symbolic behavior, or unusual markings, as potential red flags for professionals working with families. Ultimately, Oriana Myers' story is a cautionary tale of emotional instability meeting opportunity, in a context where small communities and rural isolation may delay outside intervention. Law enforcement, mental health professionals, and neighbors can learn from her behavior patterns to recognize warning signs and prevent future tragedies. Welcome to Cold Read Crimes. I'm your host. Today we're diving into stories from West Virginia that postcards and travel guides rarely mention. West Virginia is often called almost heaven, celebrated for its rolling hills, tight-knit communities, and strong family bonds. But hidden in the quiet hollows are events that challenge our assumptions about trust, protection, and the safety of children within a home. From the moment we're born, we learn to trust maternal care as an unbreakable bond. In rare cases, that trust is shattered, not always by malice alone, but sometimes by unseen psychological distress or systemic failure. Today, we'll explore 10 true crime cases from the Mountain State, analyzing behavioral patterns, systemic gaps, and warning signs that, if noticed earlier, could have saved lives. These stories are not meant for shock. They are lessons in vigilance, intervention, and understanding the complexities of human behavior. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications. At Cold Read Crimes, we dig deeper, examining details most overlook. I want to ask, where are you watching from today? What's the time and weather in your area? Share in the comments. I love seeing the reach of these stories. Next, we leave Greenbrier County for Berkeley County, where the next case shows a different form of maternal betrayal, driven not by resentment, but by personal desire. Case 2, Molly Jo Delgado. On the night of January 24, 2017, the freezing air on cracked Walnut Way in Martinsburg, West Virginia, inside a modular home. Justin Delgado Sr. woke abruptly, alerted by a strange, acrid smell. Normally a sound sleeper, his body reacted before his thoughts caught up. He moved through the dimly lit home, trying to assess what was happening. His first thought was for his sons, 5-year-old Justin Little Judd Jr. and 3-year-old Delma. When he reached their bedroom door, he discovered it was locked from the outside. Without hesitation, he broke a kitchen window, climbed out into the freezing night, and called for help. His father-in-law, Drew McCombs, ran toward the home and noticed something unsettling. Molly Jo Delgado, the boy's mother, was walking calmly toward the house despite the chaos around her. Firefighters from the Beddington and Hedgesville departments entered the modular home to find the children unresponsive. The details were complicated, but investigators quickly determined that this was not an ordinary house fire. At first, the fire appeared accidental. Older modular homes are prone to electrical issues, heating problems, and other risks. But West Virginia has a specialized investigator for unusual fires. Supervisory investigator George A. Harms. Harms spent hours examining the home's layout, electrical systems, and ventilation. He found no common causes for accidental ignition, no wiring faults, no malfunctioning outlets, and no evidence of smoking materials. To be certain, he contacted the ATF Fire Research Laboratory. They built a precise reconstruction of the children's bedroom, replicating the beds, mattresses, sheets, and airflow. In a series of controlled test burns, investigators confirmed that the patterns observed in the original fire could not have occurred by accident. 2 ignition points were identified, indicating the fire had been intentionally set in multiple locations. The investigation extended beyond the physical scene. State police reviewed Molly Jo Delgado's digital footprint and discovered communications indicating an ongoing extramarital relationship. Records showed she was on a call with her boyfriend for approximately 1 hour on the night of the fire. Investigators estimated that shortly after that call, she had entered the children's bedroom, contributing to the fire's ignition. There was one more piece of evidence that demonstrated careful planning. Toxicology reports for one of the children revealed the presence of a significant dose of cough medication. Investigators determined that this was administered beforehand, consistent with an intent to ensure the children remained asleep or calm during the fire. The act was deliberate and calculated, aimed at controlling the environment rather than leaving it to chance. Prosecutors argued that the actions were premeditated, reflecting a desire to erase responsibilities and create an opportunity for a new life. The calculated nature of the incident challenged the notion of sudden loss of control, highlighting the depth of planning and intent. In March 2019, Berkeley County Circuit Judge Laura Faircloth delivered her sentence. After Molly Jo Delgado entered a no-contest plea to 2 counts of first-degree murder, the court imposed 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The sentence emphasized accountability, leaving no room for leniency. This case reveals how appearances can be deceiving. Molly Jo Delgado had projected the image of a devoted parent, yet the investigation uncovered an entirely different reality, one of calculated actions hidden beneath a carefully maintained facade. You've just learned about a mother whose method involved fire. In our next case, the betrayal comes in a very different form. This story involves someone entrusted to guide children, and how that trust was ultimately exploited in a deeply disturbing way. Case 3, July and Orellana, September 20th, 2018, Gerardstown, West Virginia. The first hints of autumn had begun to cool the air. 80-year-old Eliza, and 11-year-old Olivia stepped off their school buses, chatting excitedly about gymnastics practice and swimming that afternoon. Their mother, 47-year-old Julianne Orellana, was waiting outside their home on Tolpine Lane. To a passerby, it seemed like a normal, quiet weekday afternoon, a mother greeting her daughters in a calm neighborhood. But what unfolded inside the home that day would leave West Virginia shaken and reveal the dark side of calculated planning. Earlier that week, Julia Orala had purchased a handgun and drafted a 6-page letter detailing grievances and personal frustrations. Investigators later described the letter as a clear indication that she had been planning something deliberate, not a spontaneous loss of control. When the girls entered the house, Julie didn't ask about school or offer snacks. Instead, she created a scenario designed to lure them into a specific part of the home. "Girls, come here," she said quietly. "I think some kittens got into the guest room upstairs. Take this box of treats and see if you can find them." Eliza and Olivia, motivated by the idea of helping an animal, ran upstairs. Their mother followed, not with guidance or reassurance, but with a plan that investigators would later describe as premeditated. The older daughter, Olivia, sensed something was off. When she realized the situation was dangerous, she reacted instinctively. She managed to exit through a window and seek help from neighbors, who immediately called authorities. Thanks to her quick thinking, law enforcement and emergency services arrived promptly, preventing further escalation. When West Virginia State Police entered the residence, they discovered the aftermath of a situation that was carefully orchestrated. Investigators determined that the actions taken by Julie were deliberate and targeted, reflecting planning and intent rather than a spontaneous emotional outburst. The 6-page letter she had written prior to the incident underscored the calculated nature of the events. In it, she expressed frustration toward her former husband, Ed Orellana, blaming him for the breakdown of her personal and family life. Investigators described the document as evidence of premeditation rather than remorse. During her court proceedings in 2020, Julie attempted to present herself as a mother overwhelmed by stress and depression. She claimed she had never acted violently before and that her actions stemmed from fear and shame about her life circumstances. Prosecutors countered that narrative, pointing to the detailed planning, deception, and deliberate actions that placed her daughters in harm's way. The court agreed, highlighting that her behavior reflected control and anger rather than concern or protection. In February 2020, Julianne Orellana was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The verdict emphasized accountability for premeditated actions that endangered children, regardless of the motives offered in court. Eliza and Olivia's story is a sobering reminder of how trust can be exploited. Behavioral experts noted that this case illustrates a calculated deception dynamic, where a child's natural kindness and willingness to help can be manipulated by someone they should be able to trust implicitly. We've now explored fire as a method of harm and deception as a trap. But what happens when the adult responsible is a trained medical professional? In our next case, we'll enter a clinical setting where access to medicine was misused rather than meant to heal. Pause for a moment and think about this. This case involved a school guidance counselor, someone widely seen as a safe adult. In your opinion, which is more unsettling, a parent acting on sudden emotional impulse or one who carefully plans a scenario to manipulate trust? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Case 4, Mary Beth Davis. Case 4 takes us to Lewisburg, a historic town in Greenbrier County, known for its preserved architecture and small-town calm. But in the early 1980s, the quiet corridors of the local hospital became the setting for a series of events that would permanently alter West Virginia's understanding of maternal trust. This is the case of Mary Beth Davis, a registered nurse whose actions would raise serious questions about the abuse of professional authority within a family. Picture a hospital room at 2:15 in the morning. The lights are dim, the hum of medical equipment fills the room, and the only movement comes from the faint echo of shoes on polished floors. In the bed lies 3-year-old Tegan Davis, a child who had already spent significant time under medical supervision. During routine rounds, a night nurse noticed Mary Beth standing at her daughter's bedside with a syringe in hand. Because Mary Beth was a nurse herself, Her presence did not immediately raise concern, but the nurse's instincts told her something was unusual. When she asked Mary Beth what she was administering, Mary Beth replied, "It was a vitamin," and instructed the nurse to document it. However, there were no standing orders, and the nurse, trusting her professional judgment, refused to record the dose. That single act of caution would later prove crucial in understanding what had been happening. To understand the scope of the situation, investigators looked back to September 1981. Mary Beth's infant son, Seth, had experienced a severe medical crisis at home and was rushed to the hospital. At the time, doctors searched for rare genetic explanations for his condition. Years later, prosecutors suggested that medical intervention may have been influenced by outside factors. Seth survived but required long-term care, which shaped much of his childhood. Attention later focused on Tegan. In March 1982, she experienced a serious medical episode that was initially diagnosed as a rare condition common in children after viral illness. Over time, medical examiners identified irregularities in her treatment that raised questions about external influence. Investigators concluded that a person with medical knowledge had a role in shaping the course of care, highlighting the potential misuse of professional authority in a domestic setting. Prosecutors argued that Mary Beth Davis displayed behaviors aligned with what is now known as factitious disorder imposed on another. This condition, previously called Munchausen syndrome by proxy, involves creating or exaggerating medical issues in someone under your care to gain attention, admiration, or validation. In this case, the alleged motivation was not financial. It was recognition, respect, and the appearance of being a devoted parent and professional. Despite the warning signs, legal action was slow to emerge. It was not until 1997, 15 years after Tegan's incident, that Mary Beth Davis was brought to trial. Prosecutors emphasized her professional authority as a critical factor, noting that her nursing credentials often discouraged colleagues and medical staff from questioning her actions. During the trial, Mary Beth remained composed, presenting the argument that her children had rare medical conditions. The jury, however, found the evidence indicated intentional interference with medical care. She was convicted of actions that resulted in serious harm and received a life sentence. In 2007, after serving roughly 10 years, Mary Beth Davis's convictions were reduced on appeal. She entered a plea agreement for 2 counts of attempted harm and was released based on time already served. The case of Mary Beth Davis serves as a stark reminder. Authority can be misused, and professional trust, when left unquestioned, can have serious consequences. It underscores the importance of vigilance, collaboration, and advocacy within medical systems. So far, we've seen ritual, fire, and deception. Mary Beth Davis relied on something more subtle but equally powerful: credentialed trust. In healthcare, nurses are expected to act decisively, and their word carries weight. When that trust is manipulated, it can enable a parent to influence a child's care without immediate detection. Have you ever had a moment where your instincts told you a professional might not be acting honestly? The night nurse in Lewisburg trusted her intuition at 2:15 in the morning, and that judgment was crucial. It took 15 years for the system to catch up. Share your thoughts in the comments. How do you think communities can ensure professional authority is balanced with accountability? Next, we move from hospital corridors to a 5-year mystery in Lewis County. A case that began with a 911 call about a missing toddler and ended with a conviction that proved you don't need a body to uncover the truth. Case 5. Lena Mary Lunsford at 11:30 that morning. A 911 call came in from Lena Marie Lunsford. Her voice was panicked, the familiar tone of a parent reporting every caregiver's worst fear. She told the dispatcher her 3-year-old daughter, Aliyah, was missing. According to Lena, she had put Aliyah to bed around 6:30 that morning, and when she checked later, the bedroom was empty. Aliyah was small for her age, just under 3 feet tall and weighing about 30 pounds. She had last been seen wearing purple Dora the Explorer pajama bottoms and a pink princess sweatshirt. She wasn't wearing shoes. Within hours, Lewis County erupted in activity. What began as a local search quickly escalated into a full-scale investigation. Federal authorities were brought in, volunteers from local churches and neighboring communities, scoured the surrounding forests. Dive teams combed the West Fork River. Law enforcement officers knocked on doors across the county. Days turned into weeks. Weeks became months, and months turned into years. Aaliyah's face appeared on flyers, roadside signs, and evening news broadcasts. But as the search dragged on, cracks in the story began to appear. Lena Lunsford did not behave as the public expected. She appeared distant and withdrawn. While the search continued, she relocated from West Virginia to Florida, further complicating investigators' efforts. The case remained unresolved for nearly 5 years, until the truth finally emerged, not through forensic evidence, but through testimony. Aaliyah's 2 older sisters, now teenagers, felt safe enough to speak out. In sworn statements and later in court, the sisters revealed what had actually happened inside the home on Denison Street. According to their accounts, there was no abduction. On the morning of September 24th, Lena became enraged and caused serious harm to her daughter. She then failed to seek immediate assistance, instructing her children to remain silent. By the end of that day, Lena took steps to conceal the situation. Aaliyah's body was placed in a laundry hamper, and later, Lena drove to a rural area near Vardis, West Virginia, where she disposed of the remains. For 5 years, the children were compelled to maintain the false story of a missing daughter while watching search parties and vigils unfold in the community. The trial in 2018 marked a landmark moment in West Virginia legal history. Aaliyah's body has never been recovered, and the defense attempted to use that absence to create doubt. They even presented a surprise witness, a restaurant manager from Louisiana, who claimed to have seen a child resembling Aaliyah months later. The jury was unconvinced. They relied on the sisters' testimony and observed Lena's demeanor in court. After just 2 hours of deliberation, a verdict was reached. In April 2018, Lena Marie Lunsford was convicted of murder by a parent, death of a child by abuse, and concealment of human remains. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As she was escorted from the courtroom, her aunt Tina Smith voiced a question many had carried for years: why? We would have taken her. No child deserved this. Lena Lunsford believed that hiding her daughter's body would hide the truth. But even without physical evidence, the truth emerged through the voices that could no longer remain silent. West Virginia is defined by narrow valleys, remote hollows, and widely spaced communities. In places like Vardis, neighbors can live half a mile apart without ever crossing paths. Isolation can feel peaceful, but in cases like Lena Lunsford's, it became a shield. It allowed a secret to remain hidden for 5 years and underscores a recurring theme in many of these cases. Danger can persist quietly, right under the surface, until someone finally speaks up. We're halfway through this investigation. If you appreciate the depth of research behind these stories, tap the like button. It helps the channel more than you might think. And here's a question for you. If you were on that jury, could you convict someone of murder without a body ever being found? Share your thoughts in the comments. Next, we move from a no-body conviction to a case that is still unfolding. One so recent it shocked the state and forced a community to confront what had been hidden in plain sight. This is the story of Julie Miller. K6 July Miller. April 17, 2024. Morrisvale, West Virginia. A 911 call reported a death at the scene. Boone County Sheriff's deputies arrived at a modest brick home on Cheyenne Lane, expecting a medical emergency. What they encountered instead would become one of the most disturbing cases of child neglect in modern West Virginia history. Authorities found 14-year-old Kindedi Miller in severe physical distress. Boone County Prosecutor Dan Holstein described her condition as the result of prolonged neglect rather than a sudden medical event. Sheriff Chad Barker, a veteran of decades in law enforcement, later said the sight was unlike anything he had encountered in his career. Investigators quickly determined that Kindedi had not just collapsed recently. Evidence showed she had been incapacitated for an extended period while the adults in the home continued their daily routines. No emergency call had been made, and no medical assistance was sought. As detectives pieced together Kindedi's life, a picture of near-total isolation emerged. She had not attended in-person school since late 2019 or early 2020. Her mother, 49-year-old Julie Miller, claimed Kennedy was being homeschooled due to anxiety related to COVID-19. But state records told a different story. No academic assessments, progress reports, or formal documentation had been submitted for years. For all practical purposes, Kennedy had disappeared from the system. Neighbors told investigators they rarely saw the teenager outside. Authorities later alleged that in the final 4 years of her life, Kennedy left the house only twice. She lived behind closed doors and drawn blinds, hidden from teachers, doctors, and mandatory reporters. The system had a chance to intervene. In March of 2023, roughly 1 year before Kennedy's death, a West Virginia state trooper conducted a welfare check at the residence. He noted that Kennedy appeared fearful and reluctant to leave the home. After leaving, GPS records showed the trooper visited the Boone County Human Services office for just over 8 minutes. He made an informal suggestion that the family might benefit from mental health resources. No formal referral was entered. No follow-up visit occurred. No caseworker ever knocked on that door. Those 8 minutes became a haunting footnote in the investigation. Julie Miller initially told authorities that her daughter suffered from an eating disorder, but prosecutors found no medical records to support that claim. No physician had examined Kennedy in years. No treatment plan existed, and no prescriptions were on record. In a recorded jail phone call later released by prosecutors, Julie Miller told her parents that Kennedy wanted to die. Prosecutor Holstein described this as an attempt to shift responsibility onto a child who had been entirely dependent on the adults around her. In 2025, Julie Miller pleaded guilty to death of a child. Her plea was entered under the provisions of Emily's Law, legislation passed in 2016 that significantly increased penalties for fatal child neglect. Under Emily's Law, neglect resulting in death is treated with the same seriousness as intentional harm. Julie Miller now faces a sentence ranging from 15 years to life in prison. Kennedy's grandparents, who lived in the home and witnessed her deterioration, are also facing criminal charges. Miller was the only child in that house. 3 adults observed her decline over years, not days, and did nothing. Her death was not hidden. It happened in plain sight, behind closed doors, protected by isolation and silence. Emily's Law was enacted after the death of 10-month-old Emily Beringer in Jackson County. Lawmakers concluded that allowing a child to deteriorate slowly is not an accident. It is a prolonged act of harm. The law doubled sentencing ranges for parents whose failure to act results in death. In West Virginia, neglect is no longer viewed as passive. When a child depends entirely on adults, doing nothing is a decision with consequences. West Virginia lawmakers are now debating Rayleigh's Law, which would increase oversight for homeschooling families with a documented history of abuse or neglect. Do you believe the state should monitor high-risk homeschooling situations more closely, or does that cross a line into parental rights? Share your perspective in the comments. Next, we leave Boone County and head north to Sisonville, where isolation took a different form, and children were treated not as dependents but as tools. This is the case known nationwide as the Sisonville Slave Shed. Case 7. Janie Whitefeather, October 2nd, 2023, Sisonville, West Virginia. It was a gray, rain-soaked afternoon when neighbors began to notice something unusual. Joyce Bailey, who lived across the street, had been watching the house more closely than normal. The couple who had recently moved in, Donald Lance and 62-year-old Jean Whitefeather, had brought with them an animal trailer, but it wasn't the animals that drew attention. It was the children. Joyce would later testify that upon arrival, all 5 children were lined up outside in the rain. They did not speak or move, simply standing silently as the adults completed tasks nearby. All 5 were black siblings adopted by the white couple. Over the following months, neighbors reported patterns of extreme labor. The children were required to carry heavy materials and manage chores well beyond their years. They were rarely seen playing or interacting normally for children their age. The breaking point came in early October. Joyce witnessed 2 of the older children, a 16-year-old girl and a 14-year-old boy, being escorted into a small outbuilding and locked inside. Jean Whitefeather left shortly after. Alarmed, Joyce immediately contacted authorities. When Kanawha County Sheriff's deputies arrived, they found the children confined in a small, sparsely furnished structure. There was limited access to basic amenities, and the children were using makeshift sleeping arrangements. Inside the main house, deputies also discovered a 9-year-old girl alone in a loft area. Investigators identified a clear pattern. The children were not neglected by accident. Authorities described the confinement, labor, and control as intentional. A forensic review of Whitefeather's digital records revealed repeated patterns of communication that prosecutors argued showed contempt and a dehumanizing attitude toward the children. The children described a rigid household with strict rules, limited food options, and strict enforcement of compliance. Evidence showed Whitefeather maintained a household hierarchy that treated the children as subordinate. The defense attempted to reframe the situation. Attorneys argued that the children were performing chores typical of a farm household and that the outbuilding functioned as a recreational space. They claimed the children had access to a key, though it was not realistically reachable. The jury rejected that explanation. On January 29, 2025, after roughly 8 hours of deliberation, a Kanawha County jury found Jean Whitefeather guilty on all 19 counts. Convictions included human trafficking, forced labor, and violations of civil rights. During sentencing on March 19th, Judge Mary Claire Akers emphasized the gravity of the offenses. She noted that Whitefeather and Lance appeared to show more care for animals than for the children in their custody. Addressing the defendants, the judge said they had subjected children to extreme control and hardship in a state known as almost heaven. Jean Whitefeather was sentenced to a combined term of 40 to 215 years in prison. She will never be released. This case revealed a critical vulnerability in the interstate adoption and child welfare system. Before relocating to West Virginia, Whitefeather and Lance had been investigated for abuse concerns in Washington state. However, those records did not follow them in a way that could prevent future placements. Oversight gaps between states can allow dangerous situations to continue unchecked. The Sisonville case demonstrates why efficient sharing of child welfare information is crucial. Have you ever heard of abuse cases tied to adoption or relocation in your state? Do you believe child welfare records should automatically follow families across state lines? Share your thoughts below. Next, we move from prolonged control in Sisonville to sudden violence in Weston, a case involving an infant, a single critical moment, and a photograph that shocked investigators statewide. Case 8, Rista Brunexi, December 30th, 2022, Morrisvale, West Virginia. At 7:12 in the morning, Lori Clevenger received a message from her 31-year-old daughter, Krista. Lori likely expected something ordinary. A photo of her 3-month-old granddaughter, LS, may be asleep or bundled up for winter. Instead, the image showed Krista holding her child in a distressing situation that immediately alarmed the family. Within minutes, a neighbor called 911, reporting a serious incident in the apartment. Lewis County Sheriff's deputies arrived shortly after. They found Krista and the infant in need of urgent attention. Emergency responders transported both to the hospital. Tragically, the infant was pronounced deceased shortly after arrival. Krista herself received immediate medical care. From the start, investigators noted that Krista did not attempt to hide what had occurred. She consistently reported to medical staff that she had harmed her child, and then herself, providing a clear account of the events. In the days leading up to the incident, Krista's behavior had noticeably changed. According to her partner, she had become increasingly withdrawn, stopped sleeping, and expressed feeling out of control of her thoughts. She reported hearing things and described a growing sense of mental instability. Concerned for her well-being, Krista sought help. 2 days before the incident, she brought her daughter to the emergency room, expressing fears about her own mental state. She was evaluated and prescribed medication for anxiety and depression. However, no inpatient admission occurred, and there was limited follow-up. The night before the incident, Krista asked her partner to leave the apartment. When he returned the next morning, authorities were already on the scene. In July 2023, a Lewis County grand jury indicted Krista Brunech on charges related to the death of her child. She has remained in custody awaiting trial, which will require the court and a jury to weigh questions of criminal responsibility alongside mental health considerations. Krista's mother, Lori Clevenger, has since spoken publicly about the case, advocating for greater attention to postpartum mental illness. She emphasizes that her daughter had sought help and that systemic gaps in care may have contributed to the tragedy. Postpartum psychosis is rare, affecting roughly 1 or 2 out of every 1,000 new mothers. When it occurs, symptoms can escalate quickly, particularly in rural areas with limited access to specialized psychiatric care. Unlike other cases we've examined, the Brunetsch case highlights how mental illness can suddenly and tragically intersect with parental responsibilities. It raises difficult questions. If a parent recognizes they are struggling and asks for help, what happens when support is insufficient? Do you believe documented attempts to seek mental health care should influence criminal responsibility? Or does the outcome alone determine accountability? Experts, families, and legal systems continue to debate these questions. Share your perspective in the comments. Next, we move from a mental health crisis in Lewis County to a case of prolonged neglect in Fayette County, a situation so severe it led to a change in state law. Case 9, July Tichenal, December 26, 2018. Oak Hill, West Virginia. While many families were winding down from Christmas morning, a serious situation unfolded inside a home on Hilltop Drive. 8-year-old Rayleigh Jolynn Browning had suffered from long-term neglect, a situation that would later trigger one of the most significant child welfare reforms in West Virginia. When paramedics arrived that morning, they immediately recognized that this was no ordinary call. Rayleigh's condition reflected prolonged deprivation, not a sudden accident or illness. Despite emergency efforts, she tragically did not survive. Fayette County authorities identified 3 adults responsible for her care: her father, Marty Browning Jr., his girlfriend and Rayleigh's stepmother, Julie Tichenal, and Julie's sister, Sherry Tichenal. Investigators found that all 3 had failed to provide adequate care, creating a household dynamic in which Rayleigh was singled out for mistreatment. Testimony from relatives and surviving siblings described her as the household scapegoat, treated differently from the other children. Over time, Rayleigh was repeatedly denied access to water and basic necessities as a form of discipline. Witnesses reported that she became desperate for even small amounts of water, often attempting to drink from unusual sources, simply to meet a basic need. These actions were survival responses, not misbehavior. The neglect extended to the medical system. Julie Tichenal told doctors that Rayleigh had severe behavioral issues and the child was prescribed psychiatric medications. Prosecutors later argued that Rayleigh was not mentally ill. Her struggles were the result of malnutrition, dehydration, and overmedication, which masked the neglect and prevented intervention. Medical records documented a significant decline in her growth and overall health over time. The official cause of death was identified as complications from untreated bacterial pneumonia, reflecting the long-term failure to provide appropriate care. In the days before her death, Rayleigh showed visible signs of illness, yet no medical assistance was sought. During the trial, the defense argued that Rayleigh had exaggerated her symptoms and that the adults believed she was being difficult. The jury, however, found the 3 adults guilty of child neglect, resulting in death. Each received the maximum sentence allowed under that charge, 3 to 15 years in prison. For many, the verdict highlighted the limits of existing laws in addressing prolonged neglect. Rayleigh's death exposed a critical loophole in the system. Children withdrawn from schooling could evade oversight, even when abuse concerns had been reported. Teachers and other mandated reporters had raised alarms, but once Rayleigh was homeschooled, the monitoring disappeared. In response, lawmakers proposed what became known as Rayleigh's Law. The legislation prevents parents from homeschooling children if there is an active child abuse or neglect investigation. Its goal is to ensure children remain visible to professionals who can intervene before it is too late. Rayleigh Jolynn Browning is remembered by those who knew her as gentle, affectionate, and eager to please. Her story serves as a reminder that neglect does not always happen in secret. It can unfold quietly, behind closed doors, where intervention is possible but not taken. Criminologists identify the scapegoat dynamic as one of the most dangerous forms of domestic abuse. Instead of harming all children, abusers target a single child, making it easier to maintain a public image of normalcy while inflicting prolonged harm on the victim. In Rayleigh's case, this selective treatment made the neglect harder to detect. Has Rayleigh's law reached your state? Do you think a 3 to 15-year sentence reflects the severity of what Rayleigh endured? Share your thoughts in the comments. Case 10, Candace Jones. August 8, 2018. Princeton, West Virginia. 2-year-old Joseph Garboski, 3, was brought to a hospital where medical staff immediately recognized that he had endured a prolonged period of serious harm. For most children, hospitals are places of care and safety. For Joseph, it was the first time the world saw the effects of neglect and abuse he had suffered over the previous 2 weeks. By his bedside were his mother, 32-year-old Candace Jones, and her 47-year-old boyfriend, John Colin Powers. They reported that the injuries were the result of a routine household accident, but investigators quickly uncovered a different reality. Joseph never regained consciousness and passed away 2 days later. The investigation revealed that while Powers was the primary abuser, Candace Jones had been present throughout the 2-week ordeal. She had witnessed her child's decline and did not seek medical attention or help. Authorities considered this a serious criminal violation. Failure to protect a child when aware of danger is treated with the same gravity as active abuse. During the trial in 2020, prosecutors highlighted that Candace had made a conscious choice not to intervene, directly contributing to her child's death. John Powers received a life sentence. Candace Jones, under a plea deal, received the maximum sentence allowed for child neglect resulting in death, 3 to 15 years. Candace Jones's case illustrates how inaction can be as deadly as intentional harm. She was not acting out of impulse or sudden illness. Her silence had consequences that tragically ended a child's life. Over the course of this series, we've explored 10 cases that left lasting impacts on West Virginia, from Orana Myers' calculated manipulations to Kind Eddie Miller's prolonged isolation. These stories remind us that the home is not always a safe space. The Mountain State paradox is evident. The isolation and privacy of West Virginia's rural communities can protect beauty and tranquility, but they can also hide abuse. Mary Beth Davis exploited medical authority. Jean Whitefeather turned a shed into a controlled environment of labor and intimidation. Rayleigh Browning's story revealed how selective neglect could hide in plain sight. Yet these cases also show progress. Laws like Emily's Law ensure that neglect resulting in death carries serious consequences. Rayleigh's Law closes gaps in oversight for homeschooling children at risk. And Lena Lunsford's case demonstrates that the justice system can achieve convictions even without a body, through careful testimony and investigation. True crime is not just about the who or the how. It's about understanding the why and taking steps to prevent future tragedies. These 10 cases highlight the critical importance of vigilance, oversight, and speaking up for those who cannot advocate for themselves. Thank you for staying with us throughout this investigation. If you found these stories meaningful, consider sharing this video to raise awareness about child safety. Which case in this series do you think represents the greatest systemic failure? Was it the 8-minute trooper visit in Boone County, or the ignored teacher reports in Fayette County? Share your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your perspective. I'm your host for Cold Read Crimes. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and we'll see you in the next investigation.